room.
Jordan, I'm just going to introduce at the beginning as the room host.
Okay. Yep. Okay. You do your job. I'll fill in the blanks.
Oh, you're the main.
You're not going to do it all, Tanya? Come on.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, it's going to be great. Looks. Oh, big numbers. I see 152 people and rising.
Yeah, I think it's looser too, though.
Thank you so much.
Oh, great. I'm getting the signal that we're good to go. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Decolonization Roundtable as part of the BC Museums Association virtual conference. My name is Ta7talíya Nahanee, and I'm the director of the Cultural Resource Management Program at the University of Victoria. I'm located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people. I really appreciated at the beginning of our AGM and also featured on the BCMA website, the video that included Elder Skip Dick. I have the privilege of working with Skip Dick as part of my work here at the University of Victoria. And he always reminds us to start this work with an open heart and an open mind. And so I have his voice, I hear him in my mind as we enter into our conversations here today. So the Cultural Resource Management Program has the honor of sponsoring this session today, and I'm here as your session host. Again, my name is Ta7talíya Nahanee, and my pronouns are she and her. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm just asked to do a bit of housekeeping before we begin. So we will record this session. I encourage everyone who's comfortable doing so to switch their video on during the event. It creates a nice sense of community, but if you choose not to for the recording, that's absolutely fine. Please use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments. It's on the bottom of your screen. It may be hidden, but it'll pop up on your bar in the middle at the bottom. A feature menu will pop up. And when it's time to open the discussions, there'll be two ways of engaging. One could be that you have that question in the chat, and the other might be that you raise the little blue hand that you can find in the participant section. In an effort to improve accessibility, there's also a live transcription available. You can click on the live feature there, and it'll open in your browser. Okay, and I'm very pleased to introduce Jordan Coble, who will be facilitating the session here today. I have the privilege of working with Jordan as a member of the BC Museums Association Council, and I appreciate so much his passion and commitment. I see it in the work that he does at the səxʷk Cultural Center, and as well as an elected councillor with the Westbank First Nation, and as well as his the voice that he brings to council. So I would love to hand it over to you, Jordan, to welcome our guests.
Thank you very much, Tanya. ʷinmaʔm. For me, I am humbled to be asked to facilitate this discussion. As you can hopefully, maybe not so much anymore, tell, I'm still quite young. I'm still kind of new in the work that I do, both with the museum, but also today as an elected official, as a council member for Westbank First Nation. But I'm extremely proud and honored to be asked to facilitate this discussion. Forewarning, I tend to be long-winded, so I'm going to try to not do that and give space to our speakers to speak for themselves and just try to help facilitate the discussion. So for those who don't know, Westbank First Nation is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Siyam Okanagan people. There are 7 Canadian side communities that make up the Okanagan Nation, and then our Colville Confederated Tribes down south on the American side of the border that comprise the entire nation. We all speak, or I shouldn't say that, we're trying to revitalize the language of Nsiyilch, and that's our traditional language. I'm a speaker today, I'm a language learner, and so part of decolonization for me has been learning our language and understanding the complexities that come with that and the decolonizational practices that need to be instituted in order to really truly understand, and what I like to explain, to feel our language. When I work with other museums, other institutions, a lot of them want to learn our language, and I say, well, that's great, I can provide you translations, but I can't get you to understand or feel the language the way that our elders do, the way that I'm striving to do. That takes decolonization. So this is a great way to kind of introduce that. And so to introduce who I am, today, as has been mentioned, I'm a council member for Westbank First Nation. I'm the former cultural and operations administrator for the Centuites Heritage Museum. I was a big part in creating that museum for our community as a way to decolonize who we are as Indigenous peoples of these lands, but also to ensure that there's messaging that goes out, educational opportunities that go out, so that everyone else understands who we are, what it means to be Indigenous to this place, and what it means to be inclusive of all perspectives, of all ways of being, so that we can live or strive to live in harmony with one another, respecting each other's laws, respecting each other's ways of being, but being rooted in indigeneity, what connects us to this place. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm very privileged and honored to introduce our panelists today. We have, and you're really going to have to forgive my pronunciation on this one, but I'm going to do my best. So we have Ta7talíya Nahanee, and we also have Chief Janice George, Chepximiya, Siyam, Chief Janice George. Very honored to welcome you to the panel. I had all my notes on my iPad, and then due to all the technological difficulties, I had to use my iPad. So I'm going to freewheel it the way that I always do. So what I'm going to do is open it up for yourselves to introduce yourselves for the first few minutes. We only have two panelists on the discussion panel, so we should have a little more opportunity for you to speak. But what I want to do, there's a couple points I want to emphasize. The first one is that this is an opening of the door for further discussions beyond this discussion panel. So we totally understand that many communities, many institutions, many museums are at different stages of decolonization and just indigeneity and indigenizing their own spaces. And so if you're at the very beginning of that, that's absolutely awesome. We encourage you to continue forward. And if you're at the point of taking action, well, that's just as great too. And we want to continue as well to keep moving forward. And hopefully this panel will help move that discussion, create some opportunities for questions to be asked in a respectful manner and then responded to accordingly. And the other emphasis that I want to have is that I want to make sure that we have at least 20 to 25 minutes of question and answer at the end of it. So panelists, I'm going to apologize right now if I have to cut you off to maintain that timeline. That was the one note that I do recall in my notes that I had in the pre-meetings, that timing is crucial. So with that, I'm going to welcome Ta7talíya Nahanee to the stage, to the Zoom room, and it's all yours.
I'll defer to you. Introduce yourself first. Tanoyap and Sequatos, Ayas Chaptanoyap, Chepximiya Siyam Kwashamensna, Tanachin Plasnak is Gahop Mish Uchameoch, Anwanacht and Squalwin. Anwanacht and Squalwin means I'm here as a respectful person. My ancestral name is Chepximiya Siyam, and my English name is Janice George, and I'm a hereditary chief from the Squamish Nation. I come from this place called səxว์, which is today called False Creek, and that's where my ancestor Chepximiya was chief. My elders of my family asked me to carry this chieftainship and represent my family and speak for my family and my people. I'm really honored to be here today, and I think I wanted to talk about the decolonizing I love that Jordan was talking about, you know, learning the language, and all of the words that he used, we use as in our program as well. And using the language is so important. And I just wanted to talk to about my experience and the experience of my people, of, you know, of repatriating ancestors from the National Museum. And at first we didn't know our ancestors were there. When I was doing an internship there, I discovered that there were two ancestral remains, and it was a man and a woman. And it also happened to be that their foreheads were shaped, they were bound and sloped. And so we knew they were high people. And I had talked to my grandmother about high people and chieftainships and chiefs. And she was saying that, you know, talking about the role of the chiefs, and that also when they pass away, that there's always a big storm, always a big windstorm. And you know, and she taught me other things about being a chief, like I go last, and you know, the people are considered first, and that you know, she always talked about kindness and loving the people, and asking people to love each other. So with those teachings, I went back and discovered, as I said, that there were two ancestral remains at the museum there. And I called home and talked to our leadership of the day, and they said, go ahead and start that process of bringing them home. So we did that. We started the process, which was a really long process. We had to write out a letter to 72 nations and tribes, letting them know, all the way down to the US. I'm in Vancouver. So we wrote 72 letters out, and then we had to wait for 6 months for anybody who had a disagreement with what we intended to do. And in that 6 months, we didn't have any, we didn't have anybody write and say that they disagreed with what we wanted to do to reinter them. So we began that process, and the only way we could begin that process is by, I guess I just want to share what our nation went through, like our nation's side of it. So what we did was go to the elders and talk to the elders. I did a consultation process with them for about 6 months, asking them what they wanted to do. Did they want to do DNA? Did they, you know, all of these different things that, you know, were considered in it. And they didn't agree with that. And what they said they wanted to do was have every single ceremony that the Squamish people have. We had Shaker, we had Longhouse, we had our sacred masks, and we had cedar ceremony, and we had Catholic ceremony for them as well. So they wanted to have every single ceremony that we had. And we did that. And when we flew in with those ancestors, our people, some of our people met us at the airport, and we had a police escort for those ancestors, those two ancestors. And before we even brought them back, we had our spiritual leader go there and pray. And we had community members go there and pray, a youth, because we wanted to make sure that we had somebody in 50 to 60, 70 years from now tell the story, to make sure that the younger generations heard what happened and learned from those teachings as well. We had an elder there, and our spiritual leader, and a few community members as well. And so when we landed at the airport, we had, as I said, police escort, and our people came to meet us, and we wanted those ancestors to go through, because they were taken from Stanley Park in 1887 and 1928. They were taken from Stanley Park and brought to the museum. And so we asked if we could bring them through Stanley Park, their home. And it meant a lot to our people to be able to have those ancestors go by their home and see their home again, be a part of their home beyond that land. And it meant a lot to our people. It meant a lot to our people to be able to do that for them. Because, every day we look out, all of us who are here, live here on this land that our ancestors walked, know what our ancestors went through so that we could still be on this beautiful land that we call home. How important it is to be able to bring them to their home and bring them by where they lived. I think it was a big change for our nation, and it meant a lot to people. People still to this day say, thank you for doing that work. Thank you for bringing those ancestors home. There was a lot of teachings that came with those ancestors. And we had prayers for those ancestors. And my grandmother was still here at the time, who was 95, connected to pre-contact time still with those teachings. And we sat there and we had prayers for our ancestors the night before, and my grandmother was there, and she was just a little, like, up to my shoulders, and I'm 5'2". And so she said, I want to go see those ancestors. I want to go up there and see them, because we had a viewing. And so I walked up there, and my little grandmother was holding my arm. And it's so hard to describe, and I usually get emotional when I talk about looking at those ancestors that were minimum 4,000 years old, minimum 4,000 years old, and high people. We knew they were high people. And my grandmother standing there with her. And I have to say that love that came from my grandmother and the love that came from those ancestors was the same. And it was just as strong looking at those ancestors and feeling that as it was standing there with my grandmother and her she was holding me up. That's the strength that, that she had and that those ancestors brought to us. And it really, really made me understand how to look out the window or look out the door every day and understand what those ancestors did, what they did for me to be here today. And I always thought, because I did museum work, that it's a different feeling when you're honoring those people that did this work, because they went through a lot to bring us to where we are, and went through a lot to carry on that art. And it's just, it's like an amazing story of strength and resilience. And not only did we get to see, to see and feel what they did, but they taught a lot of new protocols, not new protocols, but protocols we knew we had that we used, and we used it a different way because it was our first repatriation. And so we learned a lot of new protocols, but not only that, for the Squamish Nation at the museum, they learned some new protocols as well, because, things happened not quite in the order that, we thought. I didn't know that they were going to be showing those ancestors to guests, and I was the host. And so we showed them to them, and none of us knew that there was going to be ancestral remains in that room. So, we went through a whole talks at the museum about that after it happened, and changed the way that things were done at the museum. And I always thought that was so amazing, because those ancestors were they're still teaching us today. And that's a part of that's our foundation. Those are foundational teachings of how we take care of those ancestors, because they took care of us. And that's what it means. That's what it means to us. And I thought it was just, it was a life-changing thing, and life-changing, as I said, for all of our people. And I just wanted to share the strength of that. And when we see things in museums, we're, able to go in there and have ceremony for them there at the museum. Bring our elders there and include them. Bring our youth in there and include those youth. And I think it was just a beautiful learning, and that we're learning from those ancestors. That's what that's what I wanted to share. Oh, and I wanted to share that when we did this repatriation, it was in 2006. And as I said, my grandmother gave me this teaching that when high people go, there's always going to be a windstorm. And I don't know if some of you are from Vancouver, have a really good memory, but in 2006, there was a huge windstorm, and it happened not too long after we repatriated our ancestors. And I always think that we're always shown the way. We're always shown that we're doing the right thing. We're on the right path, you know, but we have to look for that. That knowledge is always there, and there's always reaffirmation, or there's always affirmation that we're on the right path. Siyam?
Oh, the global flyover.
Oh,
I love that part.
Oh yeah, global. So Global News, after the storm, did a flyover. They did a helicopter flyover on the news, and they said, we're going to show you where the most damage or the most trees were down, and it was right there where those ancestors were, and they were taken from. It was right in that spot that we had already known. But you know, all of these things that happen show us how to conduct our life. Yeah. And like I said, Global News called it destruction, but really I looked at it, and a lot of people looked at it as rebirth. It's somewhere where we go now and reaffirm our presence there. So a lot of amazing things happened, and a lot of learning was done from bringing those ancestors back home. But having the time to re-look at the things that we do for our people, was important. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chief. Before you start speaking there to the Ta7talíya, I'm just gonna kind of share a little bit, part of my beeping. So what the story that was shared is very important. Decolonization is, for me, it's knowing who you are and where you come from. First and foremost, knowing exactly who you are, how you as an individual came to be. And as it was mentioned, you know, our ancestors have taken care of us up to this point, and now we're in a generation where it's the young people that are going to have to start taking care of the elderly and teaching, taking care of our ancestors. And so quite often, well, I'm going to go back a little bit. When I was young, I hated museums. I hated what they did to our people, to Indigenous peoples all across the world. I hated that. I remember when I was really, really young, colonial museums, and this is no knock on them. They're great people, and I love colonial museums. But I remember going there as a young child and seeing the sarcophagus, and I was like, why am I looking at a dead body? This is someone's relative. These are someone's ancestors. So repatriation is huge in the decolonization practices, because we have to know, as Indigenous peoples, we have to know who we are, where we come from, all that was done before us, and how amazing the work was. You know, history, history is a product. It's something that we can consume, we can sell. And we've been sold this package of history for far too long, that Indigenous peoples didn't have complex societies, didn't have interconnectedness beyond their own boundaries. So to return our ancestors home reminds us where we came from, who we are, what we stand up for today, and inspires our younger generations to take on that responsibility moving forward. And the work being done today will hopefully make their path a little bit easier. So I just wanted to share that before we go forward. But with that, on to you, Ta7talíya. I'm horrible with names. Ta7talíya, sorry.
It's Ta7talíya. Ta7talíya Kwi Unsna, Eslahan O Homeo, Skomish O Homeo. Chen Quemin told me, Chief Janice, for sharing the story that I get to hear many times. That's why I asked her to remember to add that last part on, because I think that's so important to realize that there are all these things going on that you may not be aware of, you know, and that when we see the flyover, we're seeing something very different from what you're seeing. And so that's a decolonization in itself. So yeah, just loving to be here in support of my teacher. Really, I just want to share that Chief Janice and I are both from the Squamish Nation, and we've been in a bubble together for since February, so don't freak out that we're not in masks or in distance. We're a very close family. We're the founders of tel'nexw Leadership Society, and we're on a call earlier today with our society. So just wanted to do the COVID talk. But to tell you a little bit more about me, so I'm the founder of Decolonizing Practices. I run an Instagram called Decolonize First. I share a little decolonial memes because I'm committed to taking the word out of academia and bringing it into our day-to-day lives. I went back to school after being a graphic designer and communicator in First Nation specific environments for 20 years. Then went back to school to do an MA in communication, and couldn't believe that I had not felt comfortable talking about decolonization before that, even though I had worked in social justice sectors and for Native Women's Association of Canada, and I was always intimidated by the word. And I've come to see that as another barrier that colonialism puts in the way of us deconstructing colonialism. So, I've committed to using my skills as a designer, as a writer, and facilitator to, yeah, to just break it out and talk about it, and talk about the many ways, you know, that it shows up in the world. I say it's like the word healing, and in fact, I don't really use decolonization, the noun. I'm focused on the verb. I'm focused on the practices. I call them the actions we can take, the ideas we can unlearn and learn, words we can say differently to undo colonial impacts. That's my definition. But I did study the Indigenous scholars and wrote my thesis about that, and then unpacked my own identity, and understanding that I was born Stalmach. I was born in my community, a Squamish person, and then all of the different names that I grew under, right? Indian and Native, and just all the way back to finally Stalmach and having my traditional name and being grounded in my teachings, and uplifting the voices of my teachers, centering Squamish teachings in our territory here, because there's really been a lack of access to that. So that's pretty much like some of my ideas of decolonizing. I say it's like the word healing. It's different for everybody every day. There isn't a finite endpoint where we know we're all going and we get the checkbox, like that doesn't actually exist. And it's this emergent space because we've been all entrenched in supremacy for so long. We have colonial conditioning about so many things. And so decolonizing all the layers of the ways that we see things and do things and know things, to our ways of doing. That's the focus of tel'nexw. Chief Janice wants me to share that I did receive an award of excellence from the city of Vancouver for a game that I designed. Some folks in this room have played the game with me. It's called Snakes and Ladders. It's a board game based on snakes and ladders embedded with Squamish sacred law, and looking at scenarios where things that look like helping are actually harmful, and then looking at other scenarios where we are living within the Squamish law of Chenchenstwai, lifting each other up. So that's the work that I do with decolonizing, and I really encourage everybody to find your way and just keep chipping away at it, whatever your sphere of influence is, whatever the layers are. I've designed a workbook called Decolonize First that really supports that, the journey into it, because it's an emotional space. You need vulnerability, you need courage, you need to be grounded in some teachings. You need to be learning in different ways, right? That a decolonial way of learning is learning from everybody. A colonial way of learning is, you know, one expert, you know, from a region that may not be yours, or culture that isn't yours. And, you know, there's this memorization and some little, you know, some analysis around it. But decolonial learning is this, you know, supporting the story that that Chief Janice shared, right? Or understanding Indigenous language, and even if you're not from that territory, trying to embody some of those sacred laws from the land that you're on. So I did hear territorial acknowledgement when we started our work together today, which always feels really good. And then in a museum space, you know, what is next, right? What's informing your decisions? Are Indigenous peoples at the table, and then what is that actually about? So trying to decolonize, you know, some of the dangers, you know, that happen for our people when we enter into these colonial spaces and are expected to undo, or we're expected to do the organizational development and do the work that we're hired to do, right? So that's something that happens in this space, that we work with, you know, within the game, like, you know, helping unburden Indigenous peoples, and to say, it doesn't mean don't work with us or don't hire us. We all have to work together, but, you know, but you have to put that supremacy on the table, and you got to have that self-analysis of, you know, how am I actually approaching this? How is our organization approaching this? And then to be aware of the people who you're working with, especially Indigenous staff. And oh, thanks for sharing the links. Someone shared some links. So there's a lot to uncover. That's sort of my blurb on decolonization, is just, like I said, undoing colonial impacts is the goal, right? Colonial conditioning is one of the impacts. Our separation from each other is an impact. You know, the way that we introduce ourselves within this social hierarchy, right? I love to share this story of a handshake, you know, where when I started I went back to school as an adult learner, and this woman shook my hand and then proceeded to tell me that my handshake was too weak, right? And inside I felt like, your handshake is really aggressive, and I feel uncomfortable. But because of the power dynamics there, she's from a dominant culture, you know, that says, oh, the strong handshake is the way. You know, I'm from a culture where, you know, if I touch someone's hand, it's with love and honor, right? It's never like to squeeze them and show them that, like, I'm stronger than them. Like, it's such a different way of approaching the world, right? So that's, you know, how we're each of us is approaching the world, and then decolonizing, you know, which one has more meaning, which one is true, you know. Those are a few examples. Yeah, there's some questions about my Instagram. So yeah, definitely, take a look. I've got a lot of decolonial memes. Really believe in deconstructing all kinds of things through that visual medium. I think it's super important. There's so much to decolonize. But the main point is that it starts inside, and then you get stronger. You get a better way of talking about things, different ways of understanding things. And then from there, you know, it's the structural changes. And I'm really just believe in incremental change. That's one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one undoing one supremacy at a time, because it's massive and not a lot of people want to do it. But, you know, there's 190 people on this call. So, you know, so gratitude to each of you for showing up today and talking about this uncomfortable topic that I think is actually liberating and is going to take us to a better place. It's never been about, you know, that we need more than everybody because now we have rights. It's really about looking at how we've shared territory. We're the masters of shared territory, right? So, you know, to change, if everybody was to change the thinking into a more relational, into 7 generations thinking, into all kinds of like our approaches to life would have a more, we believe this would be more sustainable for everybody. So that's my overview. I'll send it back to our facilitator now. Thank you. These are my words.
And both of you for sharing. It's powerful, the work you guys are doing. You know, I hope you guys acknowledge each other and say good work, because sometimes, I know because I'm in the field, that you're out there, often you're on your own, often you're on a table and you're the only Indigenous person there, or you're one of very few. It can be really challenging to continue to move that forward and to continue to have the positive energy that's needed to keep that conversation going. So my hands are up to you both. Thank you so much for helping guide the path and make it a little bit wider for everybody. But it was explained very nicely. Decolonization is an uncomfortable topic, but that's where we see growth. That's where we see some openings, some understandings. We have many stories in my culture about fights. We had a very amazing session this morning with many of our staff about community safety. We're trying to do a wraparound approach on that. So we had many different departments in there. And as council, we have to kind of guide that discussion. But I explained to them that I was born into a generation of infighting within our community. And we started a school for our children so that the children can be taught our ways and everything else that you needed in schooling at that time. But the children that went to the school were of parents that were fighting with one another. And we knew that, but we didn't recognize it. We didn't acknowledge it because we had a task as children to learn, to grow together, to support one another. What's unfortunate though is that we don't all make it. We've had trauma within all of our Indigenous communities for so many generations that it makes these types of discussions very difficult from both our side, but also to ask questions because there's so many triggers with those questions. We're finally getting to a point where we're empowering those folks who have experienced the trauma firsthand to share. And thankfully, we have a lot more open ears today than we did 5, 10, 15 years ago. Open hearts, open minds, and we're able to kind of move this discussion forward and have these talks. It wasn't that long ago that land acknowledgements didn't exist. We're at that point now where they're very common, and it's amazing. It's empowering. But now the emphasis has to be on what's next. What's the next action that's going to be taken to do more than just acknowledge the land? But for me, it starts with education. And I think, both the repatriation is educating our people about who we were. The work that's being done is about educating everyone else so that we're moving forward together. I think it's empowering, it's enlightening, but it's also very difficult. And so we can't forget to stop, reflect, and rejoice on the work that's been done to this point. Because I think, practices of repatriation, to me, I see them very similar to funerals, and you're going to have to hear me out on this. In our communities, the biggest gatherings we have, the gatherings where the most culture is shared, the most language is shared, the songs and the stories are shared, are unfortunately at funerals. What is positive about repatriation is that it's a reburying of our ancestors, but that celebration is also there. It's a sense of us coming back home to ourselves by bringing our ancestors home. And so we can start to share it in a positive way, in a celebratory manner, as opposed to always singing in a sad way. So I do want to open it up for questions after this, but I'm going to share one quick story. We just had a passing in our community 2 weeks ago. I was asked to help out, and I have 3 beautiful daughters at home and a wonderful wife. And my work is tough. As a council member, we are very more hands-on than any other municipal council member, anything you ever see before. We are very hands-on with our work. And so I was called at just after dinner on a Sunday saying, we have to pull the plug. We had a member who was on life support, and we had to let him go. They wanted me there to help. So it was a burden. It was tough. I've never wanted anyone have to experience that because it's painful. But I was, day or two went on, and I was driving my eldest daughter, to school, and I was trying to explain to her why I wasn't present at home, why I was so emotional, why I was kind of being short. And so I explained to her, this is the work that your dad does. I was taught the language. I was taught some songs. I was taught in a way that, ensure that I was passing those teachings on. And so it's my responsibility at these times to make sure that I'm present and accounted for, not as a council member, but as a person with some knowledge, with something to give, something to offer, but more importantly, the ability to help. It's decolonizing our community when we can stop looking at our administration to support us, when we can reach out to our community and they're willing to help. And so this decolonization practice that we're going through and this discussion that we're going through, I'm hopeful that it's seen as an invitation to take part in the process of decolonizing who we are as heritage sector workers, as cultural sector workers, as educators, or whatever it may be. The reason you're here for a reason. And so I really encourage you to take the opportunity to take part in this process from here on out. Everybody has something to contribute from whatever perspective, from whatever background you're in. We all have something to offer. And sometimes we fail to acknowledge that we have a gift. And sometimes the gift comes through a question. So I really want everyone to participate in this discussion. We have some amazing panelists here that will be able to answer so many questions. So please share. We have staff that are monitoring the chat, and I've been trying to be mindful of that, but I'm not a multitasker. So I just want to say thanks once again, lim-lim, from the bottom of my heart. If you see me staring off into the distance, I have the beautiful view of our lake. So that's how I get my work done, is envisioning what the future may hold for us. So I do see we have some questions coming in. I wasn't made clear as to am I reading the questions out, or is one of our staff people reading the questions out? I see a hand up.
Yeah, it's hard for us to read the text, so if somebody could read out the question, that would be awesome.
All right. So I'm going to start.
Okay,
yeah, I got the chat here, so I'll try to go back to the beginning where the first question started coming in. We have some comments here. Lots of gratitude. Sounds perfect. I'm so grateful to hear from both Chief Janice and Ta7talíya. Getting there. Your stories were very beautiful, beautifully told, and I thank you for sharing them. So there are two questions. You can raise your hand, and I saw that there was one that had a hand raised, so I'll get to you in a second, but I have one question here through the chat. As an archival student at UBC, we recently considered several portraits of high people who had undergone head binding, as mentioned by Chief George at the beginning of the session. The photographer was an ally in his time. He had asked for and been granted permission to take photographs, for example. However, his captions were problematic. He described this beauty ideal only in comparison to beauty ideals from Western settler populations. This was his lens. How can we, as archivists, curators, etc., improve on describing the holdings in our collections, being more respectful than this photographer from a century ago? Panelists?
Yeah. So, in my work at different museums, I've seen a lot of that happening. How people had a very, very, very colonial way of looking at our people. I remember, actually showing my age, but I remember when we had heard about our elders talking about going to church, and then there was people there measuring their heads because they wanted to see the size of Native people's heads and compare them to other people's heads, maybe. I don't know, but there's all of these different things that go on, information that that was probably a lot of money in that time to measure people's heads. But I think the most important thing to do and I love that question, thank you so much, is ask the people who are there. I think, ask the people that live, the original people, because they know, people think that we don't know, but I mean, even archaeologists, if they went and asked the people these discoveries, if they went and asked the people that were there, they would tell them. So I think that's the most important thing to do. Go and ask. You know, just see so many things happening where people are afraid to ask. So, you know, I encourage people, don't be afraid to go and talk to the original people of, you know, the land where you are.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that too. Is that's part of my message too. Is just wherever your sphere of influence, please do something. So you see that happening, you know, find out how you can contribute or how you can activate the people who can change that, right? So if we just sit there in judgment of how these things went, that's not going to help, right? But if you can take some action wherever you are and start to chip away at that. There are people who are working on decolonizing the archive, and absolutely it's upsetting to us. Like, I've also done photographic research and had to search squaw and Indian, and you know, like, just I have to go in through those dirty water, you know, to connect with the images and people that I have to. So wherever you are, yeah, please contribute to changing as much as you can.
Great answers. Listening is always a good response when you're trying to find something out. Is ask questions and listen for the answer. I'll take that one step further. Hire those folks. You know, we often, and this is something that I've pushed for in many of my boards that I sit on, is that if you want the work done and you're having troubles finding a champion to do it for you, don't hire them on a short-term contract. Hire them as an employee. If you're thinking they're lacking training, we'll hire them and train them. Provide that professional development for them so that they can figure out that or navigate the waters of walking in both worlds from an Indigenous perspective and being able to communicate in a non-Indigenous world. So hire those folks. I have Leanne, and I'm hopefully not going to mispronounce your name. Leanne Young, do you have a question? Your hand's been up for a while.
Hi, it's Leanne Jung, but that's okay. Often people think of Carl Jung when they see my last name. But I thought it'd be appropriate for me to position myself. I'm a third-generation Chinese settler residing on Catesy, Tawasin, Stalo, Saanich, Kwantlen, and Siminus, oh gosh, I probably mispronounced that, territory. And in my undergrad, when I read this article called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Eve Tuck and Kay Wayne Yang, we came across this interesting word, incommensurability, in context with decolonization. And incommensurability, it means basically nothing to have your basis on, measure, or nothing to really compare something to. But within the context of the article, they talked about incommensurability as within decolonization as something that's not compromisable. It requires a reordering of the world. And I'm just wondering what incommensurability may mean to you, especially in the museum world, because as an undergrad student at the time who's just focusing on surviving day to day, everyone kind of just nodded and thinking, okay, I think I get it, and just mumbles of agreement. But still to this day, I'm kind of just wrapping my head around that word incommensurability within that context. It's a big question.
No, that's a great question. Thank you very much, and please I apologize for mispronouncing your name there. But panelists, up to you.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that because it resonates in terms of my theme of the incremental change. You know, so things that are incommensurable. Like, for example, you know, the land back movement, right? You know, it's really gets a lot of backs up because it seems like so much, it's too huge, and you know, what does it mean, you know? And so we kind of get stuck in this space, and you know, what I'm interested in are all the steps that you need to take from now till then. It's more the process that's the more interesting part, that decolonizing of every person, and then every person contributing, you know, that little bit of change wherever they can, you know, and then what happens from there. And I think, you know, I'm a kid of the 70s, right? So I grew up like, and nobody wore seatbelts, nobody recycled, you know, and it just seemed like a sort of a crazy idea that now is very normal. And I think, you know, in 100 years from now, it could be very normal for everybody to introduce themselves, you know, and connecting to the land that they're living on, you know, in an Indigenous way. It could be very normal for to absolutely center indigeneity and reorder things that we just can't see right now. But I think that they're possible, and I think that there are forces at work, like Chepximiya's story described, that are setting them there. The fact that her and I are sitting here today talking to you all about this is something that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, or that, so yes, it is possible. And yes, it's incremental, and we can't get stuck on that, like the reordering of everything. We can only reorder today. We can only think about the next couple of hours, really. And then we can think a little bit deeper, and then we can get a little bit stronger, so that's where I'm at. Just describing my own life and my work that I do now, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I remember seeing some graffiti about no justice on stolen land and just not connecting at all with that idea. Like, I was like, why would they write that? It's not stolen, even though I was living on a reserve, like in a culturally segregated space, with a legislated identity and intergenerational impacts that I had no idea were actually intergenerational impacts, So that's my own example of moving from one place to another place of understanding, and I think that other people can do that too. So I hope that's helpful.
Again, thanks for answering. It's a weird question I posed, but yeah, thank you.
That's great. I'm just going to continue moving on with another question here. We were honored, this is from Tracy, and I'm going to stop trying to pronounce the last names. We were honored by the Ta7talíya Nation when they asked us to assist with care for and participate in the reinterment of ancestral remains that had been disturbed. It was one of the most profound experiences in my career to date. The loss of ceremony, however, is real and is an impediment to some repatriation projects. Are there resources that we can use and that we can refer our friends in the LTN to as we continue on this journey together? As a follow-up, are there key differences between the ceremony around repatriation of ancestral remains and material culture?
I think as Salish or as Squamish, definitely from one nation to another would not tell another nation what to do. Definitely not. That would get me in big trouble. And just to let you know that, for our belief in our ceremonies, we feel like if we have a ceremony that we can do and honor and bless and listen and contact our with our ancestors, if we can help them in that world, they can still come through and help us in this world. If there's one thing that we can do, there's never a total disconnect of teachings. We can always access teachings, and I think that I'm sure that I can't tell anybody what to do. Even in our own Squamish Nation, each family has their way of doing things. So, a family has a way to conduct their ceremonies. There's the chiach, which everybody goes by, and then there's the traditions and the family culture that everybody has in their own family. So I just encourage people to practice the part of the culture that they know and they know well, and the messages come through. Our spiritual leaders tell us there's always the teachings will come through in different generations, and maybe they won't know exactly what it is, but they'll figure out their gifts.
And I'm just going to answer on behalf of the Indigenous Advisory Committee, who's been tasked tackle repatriation and trying to create a better avenue for First Nation communities and institutions to enter the repatriation process. So there are a number of resources available. I'm going to ask our staff members to share those links as we go through this. But that's, as Chief mentioned there, it's never right for one nation to tell another how to repatriate artifacts. There's a lot of support that's always given, across nations, because sometimes, we have to acknowledge that we have a lot of non-100% Okanagan people like myself, and so we share some traditions, we can help out, but always work locally, always find someone that can help spearhead that, find a champion. We had to do some repatriation in our community, and was led by a community member well before repatriation was a buzzword. So I see that the staff has shared that, and we have one more important question that I wanted to get to. There's a question about 7-generation teachings and thinking, and the person is asking if we can hear more about 7 generations thinking.
Well, I have to say that we had just finished a Métholnach program, and I love the way my husband put it in his talk, is that you think about the 7 generations and it seems so far ahead, like there's approximately 25 years in a generation, and we're thinking 7 generations, but actually when he talked about it, he put himself in there. So there's him, and there's his children and his grandchildren, and then there's his parents and his grandparents and his great-grandparents, and they can all actually be on the same place. So that's the 7 generations, and it's really not that far when we think of the generations. And in my work I did with our own archives at the Squamish Nation, listening to the chiefs, all the chiefs' audio tapes, the chiefs always talk about taking care of the generations ahead. Like my ancestor Chepximiya, his speech was instrumental in us getting our decision in our favor. He talked about the land that he was on. He said, this land, I'm taking care of it, but it's not my land. I can't say you can have this land. I can't tell you that. This land is my grandchildren's land. It's not my land. It's my grandchildren's land. And I think that's really important to think about. We think about just last year when the smoke was so bad and the beaches were unswimmable, and tel'nexw was carrying around her baby for 17 days. How is that affecting the next generations? How is that affecting our grandchildren? I'll read you a little bit of his speech that helped us. The chief said, "I'm glad to see you. I know you come as our friend, and all my people welcome you. I have heard you speak, and these are our words to you. We do not wish to prevent the railway from entering and passing through our land, and we are willing that the company should have the right of way. They now own everything here, but why do they wish, after they have come onto our land, the little we have left? It is not long since we were told by the Queen's Reserve Commissioners that they would keep for us the land set aside many years ago. They added as much more, which they told us would be ours forever. Does the Queen wish to give us the land in order to make our hearts sick by allowing it to be taken away from us afterwards? We are weak. There are only a few of us, but the Queen is strong and can do what she likes. We can only ask you to protect us. We cannot defend ourselves. It was the Queen's heart to treat us well, justly, when we received her promise that this land would always be kept for us. Does she wish to break her word and take all our land back? I cannot think this, or you would not be here. We want you to write strongly about this land. It is our home. Our ancestors are buried here. We are willing to let the railroad pass through our land, but no more. We hope you can protect us. My people implore you to do this. We wish to cultivate this land and look upon it as the home of ourselves and our children who come after us. That was my ancestor Chepximiya in 1806 talking about the land, and knowing that he was thinking about the children and the grandchildren to come, the next generations. And, you know, that's like, when we look at things in the museum and we do repatriations, we're thinking about them in those generations gone, and we're thinking about those generations to come. And that's part of all of the chiach, the laws of the people and the teachings and the traditions of the people right there. Making the connection.
It's beautiful, and it's a great way. And unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap up this session. I know that there's like a couple of remaining questions, and I don't want to steal the thunder that was just shared with us. Oh, we got one more. Yeah, not going to deny the panelists the last few words here. So go ahead.
I just want to share with everybody that you know, to think of yourself and how will you be the better ancestor. Right, to see yourself within that 7 generations, and how will people look back to your life and how you impacted their life. You know, the colonial world and consumer culture teaches you that you're alone in this space, and you know, but our thinking and the 7 generations thinking and our community thinking is that everything we do and say is on their shoulders, you know, in care for those who are coming. Right, so just sharing that with everybody, and we share that through our leadership training, supporting people to shift into that thinking, because I think it will save us all moving forward. Siyam.
Beautifully said. So with that, I'm just, like I said, I'm going to do my best to answer the couple remaining questions that I've seen. There's one about, you know, the need for museums to continue to ask and ask and ask for support from Indigenous peoples. And yes, it can be exhausting for sure, but it's worth it. It's worth it to do it right. It's worth it to go down the path together. The end product is just a perk. It's the journey that of asking those questions and seeking those answers and working together to you know, overcome obstacles. That's the reward in this. That's the decolonization of this. It's not what you end up putting on the wall at the end of the day. That's a perk. We had an ethnomusicologist that asked a question about returning of recordings. I know that is offered and is part of the repatriation process. And again, I'll encourage you to follow those links to do that, to see how that can be done. But to really just to wrap up, I just want to sincerely share my gratitude for each and every one of you for being part of this discussion. I know it's not an easy discussion. I know this is, in many cases, just the beginning, but I want to encourage you to have the patience and have the endurance to withstand everything that's going to come with this. It's not an easy road, but if it was easy, it would have already been done by now. And so I welcome you to ask more questions of BCMA, of our board of directors, of your local institutions, and especially your local First Nation communities, your host nations. It was perfectly said, you know, we represent the people today, but we're here as borrowers of the land, borrowers of the culture, borrowers of the language. We hope that we have something to offer those future generations yet to be. We hope that they can do their best to carry on the path, but they're only going to do so if we make it a healthy environment for them to do so. So again, I'm just going to close with my language. White lim lim putjiap apenat skalhalt tashkin lim putjiap or lim yat astkulum. So I just said, White, thank you so much for being here today, being present with us. Thank you. I'm so grateful for the work that you all do and your willingness to go through this together. And I wish you all the best moving forward. Again, if you have questions, feel free to shoot them over and we'll make sure we can do our best to answer them. I want to give a special thanks to our panelists. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your caring, your kindness and your willingness to share, but more importantly, the work that you do. It's very meaningful and is very appreciated. So thank you very much. Ta7talíya, you're amazing. Love you. Can't wait to see you in person one day soon. Everyone else, hope we see you down the path.
I know the virtual conference is wonderful, but I also miss being with everyone in person. Thank you so much to you too, Jordan. and Chief George and Ta7talíya. That was an incredible session. It's so nice to be here, and it was such a nice big group coming together. We have an opportunity for Ask the Experts now, so I know many of you are interested in diving into those personal conversations that you have about what's going on in your institutions now. And I also look forward to seeing you at the awards ceremony tonight. So thank you, everyone.